To me, awakening is that initial moment of, I am not who I thought I was. It's that initial moment of, okay, there's this awareness that's behind my mind, behind my thoughts, behind my ego, behind identification with form, all these different things. That's awakening, but that's just the very beginning of the journey.
Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin back again. And today we have another special guest with us. We have Logan Barone from his YouTube channel, Spirituality Made Simple. Now, he is a best-selling author, he's a spiritual life coach, and he's known for making a giant leap from kind of a evangelical ministry type thing into spiritual awakening. So I'm looking forward to hearing his story and hearing some of his insights.
This has potential to be one of the best conversations we've had on this show. He says some really insightful things. I like where his head's at. So I'm eager to get into it.
Logan, thank you so much for being on the show. You've got some very fascinating content on your YouTube channel. I thought maybe a good place to begin for our audience might be at the point in your journey where you were kind of changing from that evangelical ministry type thing into the spiritual awakening aspect. How did that all come about for you, and how did it get to like where you are right now?
Great question. Yeah, I think for me, being curious and being open-minded has been the very thing that has caused my spiritual evolution, if you want to call it that. So even as an evangelical, even when I was a Catholic growing up, before I was an evangelical, I was always just questioning everything, and I was never satisfied with the answers that I was getting from certain people and just accepting things based upon blind faith. And I can't tell you why I've always had that within me, but that's just the way it's been. I think maybe part of it is my dad, because my dad is also someone who's been open minded. And so maybe he instilled that within me. But yeah, so when I was in college, actually studying, evangelical theology for the most part, I was presented with this new view of eschatology, which is the study of end times. And so I grew up believing that, the typical evangelical dispensationalism of rapture theology, Jesus is coming back at any second. I remember growing up as a kid, waking up in the middle of the night, being terrified because if I was awake and it was like 2 a.m., I'd have to go check and make sure all my family members were still there and that I didn't miss the rapture.
Yeah.
So this was something that really terrified me. And then when I got into ministry, that was like my main point in evangelism, in converting people. I would say, hey, look, Jesus is coming back at any moment. So you better be sure you're right with the Lord and just give it a try. Just surrender your heart because, what do you have to lose? That was my pitch. But someone actually presented this new way of viewing biblical eschatology to me. And because I was somewhat open-minded at the time as an evangelical, I started studying the scripture from a different perspective than how I was taught. And in that process, what I learned was that there's actually a lot of power in my independent thinking, in my critical thinking, in doing my own research. So that was the first time I had a big change of mind. And I was still a Christian, I was still an evangelical, but the fact that I actually changed my mind about something that I had once believed in for pretty much my entire life was very interesting. And I was like, okay, what's next? Because then I started asking the bigger questions like, well, if my pastor was wrong about this, what else was he wrong about? And then that started this deep dive, this rabbit hole of questioning other doctrines. And eventually, it took about 2, maybe 3 years of kind of secretly deconstructing my evangelical faith. But after about 2 or 3 years, I eventually walked away from Christianity or Christian fundamentalism. And what does that exactly mean? Well, for me, it was I got to a point where I no longer adhered to the Nicene Creed.
Mm.
as like this dogmatic, this is the one and only way reality is. So that's
So,
what led me into awakening. Go ahead. You had a question?
sorry, what is the Nicene Creed? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, the Nicene Creed is basically it was 325 AD when early Christianity, a lot of people don't realize this, but early Christianity was not like this like unified orthodox thing from the very beginning, from the first century. It was very diverse in a similar way as, today in Christianity, there's many different denominations. Well, in the first few centuries, really first 3 centuries, there were many different Christian groups, and they would constantly argue with one another about things like God and Jesus. Was Jesus fully God, or was he just a man? Did he have some kind of divine status? What does that even mean, Son of God? So there were different Christian groups. One of the popular Christian groups believed that there's these different Trinitarian frameworks. Okay. And so in mainstream Christianity today, in Orthodox Christianity, you have this belief in the Trinity, right? That belief in the Trinity became established. And really, it was the beginning of it being, I guess you could say, systematized, the beginning of that process at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Now, again, this was one particular Christian group's belief of what the Trinity was, but there were other Christian groups who viewed the Trinity from a different perspective. And one of the other main ways to view the Trinity came from a group called the Arians, and they followed this guy by the name of Arius. Well, the Nicene Christians, the ones who believed in the Trinity as we pretty much know it today with Orthodox Christianity, they needed to figure out what was going to be the one and only way the church, the Orthodox Church at that point, was going to view God, and really it boiled down to how they were going to view Jesus and Jesus's divinity. How can Jesus be fully God? And then you have God the Father, God the Holy Spirit. So with the Nicene Trinity, what came from that, it was Jesus is God, the Father is God, the Holy Spirit is God, but it's three in one, three persons in one. But with the other view of the other Trinitarian view, with the Arians, they viewed it more as subordinationism, which was, okay, the Father is above the Son, so they're not equal in that sense. And that was the big debate. That was the big argument that they settled at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, or that was the beginning of, again, that one particular view of the Trinity being really systematized. And from that point on, that's when we start to see this quote unquote Orthodox Christianity. And it was the Nicene Christians. And after that point, it was like if you disagreed with this one particular Christian group who is now merging with the Roman Empire, if you disagreed with them, like the Arians went against the Nicene Creed, you were deemed heretical. So all of a sudden we have this I'm right, you're wrong mentality, Orthodox versus heresy, and that's how it's really been ever since. And of course, there's the Reformation and there's been changes, but that's what really started all of that. So when I got to a point where I said I no longer adhered to this creed about beliefs about Jesus, beliefs about God the Father, beliefs about the Holy Spirit, about the Trinity, that's when I no longer considered myself to be a Christian.
Mm.
So,
And for
yeah.
those, so much of what you said kind of resonates when you were talking about like growing up with like the dispensation theology.
We're
like,
so much alike.
oh yeah,
Similar story.
These are things that I'm familiar with, and I'm sure anyone else who's kind of gone through the transition that you're talking about, they have memories. And so, in some ways, it's a little traumatizing. So or a lot traumatizing, depending on how scared and afraid it might have made you. When you started transitioning and coming out of this and having alternative viewpoints and beliefs, How is that received by the people in your close net circle? Because I'm sure if you were in ministry, you had people that were probably telling you like, "Hey, you're messing with some dangerous material here. Maybe you shouldn't be diving into that." What was that like, kind of coming through that? And when you say it took about 2 to 3 years, I'm wondering, like, going into the future, if people are going to start taking note on the time periods of how long it takes people to deconstruct. Because for me, it was probably similar, around 2 to 3 years to break out of that type of
one of the first seeds for me was somebody said that, like, I'm pretty sure they were a Christian at the time, and they said one of the hardest things to do, they said, try unbelieving something. Yeah. And that was like way before I even started getting into really deconstructing everything. That sat with me so long. I was like, you're right. That would be really hard to unbelieve something I've chosen to believe. And it was true. Like, that's where the process starts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, for me, there was definitely a lot of pushback, because my curiosity, my questions were deemed as disobedience.
Scary.
Big time.
To fundamental people.
Who are you to question the doctrines in the creed? And then of course it was like you were saying, there was a lot of fear attached to it, a lot of judgment. Hey, you realize if you continue down this path, you may lose your salvation. You may go to hell. The devil will take over and control your life and fill your mind with all these crazy doctrines and philosophies, and you'll never be able to return to the one and only, all these different things. And it's like
reprobate.
I'm just sitting there listening to it, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what, I've done my homework and I've looked into this stuff for myself, not overnight, not after a week, but for years. And now I'm meeting people who have been on this journey much longer than I have. And they were Christians, and they were in ministry. They were pastors. They were theologians. They were scholars, and they took decades to deconstruct their faith. And they're seeing things from the same perspective that I'm seeing it now. Yeah. So here's the thing. Okay. Simultaneously, as I'm leaving the evangelicalism, I'm having my awakening, right? And one of the telltale signs of awakening is pattern recognition. You start to pick up on patterns in the world, in yourself, in relationships, in every aspect of life. So one of the things I noticed was, okay, I was a part of a group. There was this hive mind mentality where everyone just believed the same thing, said the same thing, acted the same. Now I'm stepping out and I'm receiving a lot of pushback, a lot of judgment, a lot of condemnation, and all these different scare tactics are being thrown at me. So it seems like that there's something going on here. And then I look back throughout history and I see that this is exactly what's happened with the different mystics, even the Christian mystics, going back to the early church. The mystics that were going against the established orthodoxy were persecuted. They were deemed heretical. They were excommunicated from the system, from the church. Why? Because they thought differently. And I think that word heretic literally means to choose or to think for yourself or something like that, which is interesting when you really think about it, right? So for thinking for yourself, for going on this journey of the inner exploration, somehow you're wrong and, they're right. So I just started to pick up on these things. And once you awaken, you experience this expansion of awareness, and you can start to see things that before you couldn't see. And once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, right, you can't unknow.
Because prior to that, it's like a fish that isn't aware of the water that it's in.
Exactly.
Did you know about spiritual awakening? Like, was that happening as you were transitioning? Like, were you reading books about enlightenment or awakening, and were you like, was this something that you were pursuing actively? Spiritual awakening?
So for me, when I left the church, I was going through different things in my life at the time. And I can honestly say, looking back, that was one of the most challenging times of my life because of the church stuff, because of deconstructing, and because of other things in my life that were all happening at the same time. And it was in that season of suffering and being in a very challenging place that in and of itself, the suffering in and of itself is what caused me to start going within because I felt like my soul was breaking. So, before that, I was living predominantly from my analytical thinking mind, from the surface level things, and just, like I said, believing things that everyone else believed in and just
Circular reason or whatever it's
circular.
called.
Exactly. I was living from that level, but because I was hurt, and like I said, I felt like my soul was fractured, it caused me to go within. And in going within and sitting with my pain, that is what birthed my awakening. And the bridge for me was Christian mysticism. So I learned about Christian mysticism and how there were men and women of Christianity who were breaking away from the institution and they were directly experiencing God for themselves. And to me, that was something that really got my interest because I was thinking, well, I'm leaving Christianity or I'm leaving the orthodoxy, but I still believe in God. I still want to have some kind of relationship with God, and I still want to continue on this spiritual journey. I don't know what it looks like. I didn't know what it looked like at the time, but I knew I still wanted that. So discovering the Christian mystics gave me a little bit of hope that I can, still have my Jesus. I can read my Bible, but I don't need the church. I don't need to be a part of a particular denomination to experience God. And when I got into the Christian mystics, which, by the way, as I am deconstructing out of evangelicalism, one of the main doctrines I was starting to deconstruct after eschatology was the doctrine of hell. This notion of eternal conscious torment in the afterlife for unbelievers. So I'm deconstructing that belief, and I'm getting into Christian universalism, and I'm discovering that one of the main views of the afterlife of the early church fathers and theologians was this universal hope that in the end, God would restore all through Christ. So it was still Christocentric, but it was this universalism message that didn't have hell in the picture because that was something that never really sat well with me. How can this God of love, whose mercy endures forever, allow people to experience eternal conscious torment with no escape? And this God is also omniscient, meaning he knows everything. The question is, okay, why would he create someone in the first place, knowing that this person would not choose him and then have to experience eternal suffering? It doesn't make any sense. It's not justice, right? So I'm getting into Christian universalism, or they call it the restoration of all things. That's kind of a branch of Christian universalism. And a lot of the mystics, maybe not a lot, maybe some of the mystics were into the restoration of all things. So the Christian mystics became the bridge for me. I started reading the Christian mystics and I started learning about the inner experience, meditation, contemplative prayer. And I was in that world for about a year. Probably would have considered myself to be a Christian mystic, whatever that means, at 22, 23 years old at the time. I'm a Christian mystic, but that's what I was into. And then eventually I moved past even that, the Christian mysticism, because getting into mysticism, I learned that, okay, there's mystics of all these different traditions. And Meister Eckhart, who's a Christian mystic, one of my favorite mystics, I still quote him a lot and read him a lot today. But he said something like, theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language. And that was it for me. And yeah, meditation has been a big part of that journey.
I'm so glad for you that you had all those gentle like, what is it called, like threshold guardians, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the same, it's the process of coming out of the closet of anything. It's like you're toying, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until you can finally just accept a final reality or seeming final reality or something. And
Sure.
I feel like identity should be mentioned here because, and I want to have a little compassion on Christians because I've actually seen both where somebody will become a Christian and their atheistic family will like all of a sudden be brutal, like because their familial identity or something's on the line. Like, what have you joined a cult or something? And the other side of it, where Christian people will start to get an idea like, hey man, I need you to confess Jesus right now. And you can see fear, they're worried and fear because they're believing all this stuff, right?
Right.
And I just think it's nice when life provides you an opportunity to slowly move over to these things instead of some like, because when I was a Christian, I was sometimes faced with like a scary dilemma. If somebody was making a lot of sense to me and deconstructing my religion, I would be really troubled, right? But then in the end, I was similar to you. It's like, well, I don't know. You ever heard about what this person writes about? And same type of thing. You're looking up mystics, and maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a way I think Jesus was talking about enlightenment, and you slowly realize the reality of it. And I love that one video where you talk about, you mentioned in the scriptures, people talking about how this is the temple that God dwells within. You know what I mean? And this, and I was just watching that on the way here, you talking about that. And I was like, so excited to hear that. Cause it's like, that's hilarious and awesome. The breadcrumbs to the truth are in there, in the scriptures,
Of course. Yeah.
It's amazing how there's different transitional characters. I like, we're talking about how like Christian mysticism was good for you. And then other people, they'll find like guys like Alan Watts or Terence McKenna or other spirit, Eckhart Tolle, or like people that kind of like steer them. It's like not like any of them are the one with the answer. They're just all pointers trying to like point in that direction. But while we're just still here with the mystical side of Christianity, for anyone who is out there maybe watching this, because I'm probably going to put something like evangelicalism to spiritual awakening in the title. If you were like an evangelical watching this, what is like the core main difference between, say, something like a fundamentalist, Christian and a Christian mystic? What's the core difference there?
I think that the core difference between a fundamentalist and a mystic, and by the way, this does not just pertain to Christianity. Something that I learned when I started studying other traditions outside of Christianity is just about every tradition has two main paths, and that's the fundamentalist path and the mystical path. So this is not just for Christianity, but the core difference to me is the fundamentalist path starts with separation. You are separated from God, right? And so that's the problem. It starts with the problem. Something has to happen in order for you to be reconciled to God. You have to be spiritually regenerated. You have to say this prayer. You have to believe. You have to do good works, whatever it is. There's something that must be done. There needs to be a mediator in order for you to be joined back to God. But the mystical path starts with oneness. It starts with wholeness. And it says, yes, you fall asleep, you forget who you really are and the oneness that you have with the divine. You develop this ego, this false sense of self, and you live from that construct for a while, but then you awaken, and the awakening in and of itself is not an attainment. It's a remembrance of the one, of who you really are. So that's the main difference. And I think that, with Christianity, something that I've noticed is between the Christian mystics and the Christian fundamentalists, like that's the big argument is, okay, was Jesus saying that Jesus, the man, is the way, the truth, and the life? No one comes to the Father except through him? Or was he saying that the I am, which is the fundamental essence of what we are, beyond the body, beyond the mind, beyond space, beyond ego, beyond time, that infinite sea of pure awareness, the I amness, was Jesus saying that that is the way, the truth, and the life? I don't know. And honestly, I don't care, because it doesn't have to be, Jesus doesn't have to be a mystic for me in order to whatever, I can
sense.
look, exactly. I can go back and read the canonical gospels and the non-canonical gospels. And I can see that they're full of mystical sayings and truths that are timeless, that I also read about in other ancient mystical texts outside of Christianity. So it's not the person saying it, it's not the messenger, it's the message.
There's such room in spiritual talk, and I'm just gonna get right to it, like awakening, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. There's such a peculiar thing where people that seem to have had awakening experiences or some kind of sustainable awakening where they are enlightened, they seem to say the same thing a million different ways trying to communicate it, and then you see the people that just don't get it, and it's almost like sometimes it seems like ritual takes the place. It's like, okay, for those of you that aren't just getting it, let's give you some rituals, and maybe it'll make your character a little more disciplined and better in the meantime, and hopefully it'll eventually lead to the Holy Spirit baptism or awakening or whatever the heck you want to call it. That's one thing of it. And then the other side of it is, I forget what I was going to say is the other side of it. I don't remember what I was going to say. Why is it so tricky to communicate? And it's interesting, if you've had an awakening experience, it can recontextualize a lot of that stuff that before was like a belief. Jesus says that your body is a temple and God dwells within it. You can conjure all kinds of feelings about what that means. You can be like, you can imagine things that'll lead you into a conversation where you're like, I know it's true because I have the Holy Spirit in me and I feel it. But there's a difference between what Christ's actually saying, like you said with that one guy that said, the mystics all speak the same language. There's a difference between the real thing and a belief, essentially.
Sure,
right?
Sure. Yeah, and this is something that I always say, but it's like, okay, the mystical path is one of direct experience. It's something that you have to experience for yourself within yourself. Nobody can tell you what it is. Nobody can give you a doctrine and say, hey, believe this, this is the way. Good luck.
Which drives everyone crazy, because if you're coming from that analytical, rational, just show me the equation.
Even worse than that, you can develop an ego. I think that even after awakening, you can be caught up in ego again. And I actually have noticed that it's potential that you could have an awakening experience or some awakening experiences and sort of be like, I get what these other people don't get. Like, there's room for that shit. You know what I mean? It's so weird. It's so freaking weird. Because like the ego seems to hang around, it looks like, for a lot of people. Maybe some people it totally obliterates, but...
Yeah, they call it the spiritual ego.
Yeah.
But I think, too, there's a misunderstanding with awakening. People think that, oh, I awaken and then the ego just disappears. And I don't really think that's what awakening is. I think true awakening is not where you exclude the ego, but as Ken Wilber says, you transcend and you include it. The difference now is you're not attached to it, and you know that that is not who you really are. But I do think, to a degree, at least in my experience, the human experience involves transcending the ego, recognizing for yourself that you are not this sense of being, not the sense of a separate self, directly tasting Brahman, the infinite, the self, then living through your ego, channeling that through your ego with this non-attachment mindset. I think that's what it truly means to be in the world, but not of the world.
And you can change that ego. All of a sudden You're like, what kind of ego am I going to be now? So what I wanted to ask you was the subtle or overt distinction between general awakening experience, which would be, conscious awareness, like a direct experience of conscious awareness or God or the eternal or the silence, that versus the awareness or experience of non-duality, unity with all things, like all things being one. Like, do you refer to yourself as we or the one? There's only one here. Is that your experience or?
So to me, awakening is that initial moment of, I am not who I thought I was. It's that initial moment of, okay, there's this awareness that's behind my mind, behind my thoughts, behind my ego, behind identification with form, all these different things. That's awakening, but that's just the very beginning of the journey. And what's crazy is I feel like the Gospel of Thomas, saying number 2, sums up this whole process of awakening and the shift from awakening to unity consciousness better than any saying or writing of all time. And what it says is this: it says, whoever seeks should not stop seeking until they find. When they find, they'll be troubled, they'll be devastated, but then they'll be amazed and astonished and they'll reign over the all. So there you have it. Someone starts seeking for truth from curiosity, wanting to know just what is truth? I want to know for myself. That journey leads you into this place of devastation when you come to know, when you come to realize that you are not who you think you are. It's a challenging journey. It brings you into the wilderness. St. John of the Cross, Christian mystic, called it the dark night of the soul. It's that in-between phase of letting go of who you think you are, your ego, and discovering who you really are. When you discover who you really are, the beginning of awakening that I just mentioned, that's the part in that saying where you're astonished and amazed after you come out of the wilderness season of the mystery and uncertainty and leaving what's familiar and leaving the traditions and the programming and the conditioning. So there's that moment of astonishment and amazement. But then the last line in that saying is that the person will reign over the all. Well, is that some kind of like power trip? Is that some kind of like hierarchy thing? No, that's not what Jesus is saying. To reign over the all is to realize that the all is all that there is, that separation is an illusion. So, in some of the other traditions, some of the different Eastern traditions, when they're talking about this journey, this sequence of awakening into the realization of the unity of being, they talk about how it's, let me remember, it's the sequence of basically in Sanskrit, I think there's a term for it. It's nete nete. It means not this, not that. So that's one of the meditations. That's something that, Ramana Maharshi would talk about when you're going through self-inquiry. I'm not this, I'm not that. Anything that you can observe as an object. Well, that means if you're observing it, that can't be you, right? So I'm observing my thoughts. I'm not my thoughts. I'm observing my mind. I'm not my mind. I can observe my body. I'm not my body, right? So that's awakening, but it doesn't end there. It doesn't end with you just going through the nete nete process. I am not this, I am not that. Because then you realize that everything that is a thing, and this is where maybe we have to bring in quantum physics a little bit, but everything that is a thing isn't really a thing, or it's not as solid and separate as we think, as it appears to be through our five senses, through this VR headset we're wearing called the finite mind. So, what quantum physics has shown us is that matter and all of the forces of the universe at the deepest quantum level, when you go beyond cells, molecules, atoms, all the stuff, what you eventually get to is this energy, pure energy vibrating at different frequencies. So it's like, okay, the separation really is an illusion. And even Albert Einstein said, the greatest tragedy of human existence is the illusion of separation. We can't experience that through the dualistic mind. That's why non-duality it's not a concept or a doctrine that you can just get on the level of the mind, because the finite mind, the egoic mind, is designed to be dualistic. But when you sink from your headspace into your heart space and you start to become absorbed in the present moment, you start to transcend linear time, then you see that through direct experience, you are not in time and in space. Time and space are within you, within that infinite awareness that you are. And again, all of matter, all these different things that seem solid and separate, they're not solid. It's all mind. It's all consciousness. So again, I'm explaining quantum physics and stuff that we can start to kind of understand on the level of the mind, but that can only take you so far. I think it's that healthy combination of, okay, understanding what the science is saying. Okay, I've got that. Great. Now, what have the mystics been saying for thousands of years? Well, they've been saying that in different traditions. The mystics speak the same language, and they've been talking about non-duality with different words for it. And then you have your own experience. And I think when all three of those line up, you can have some confidence that this might be what it is.
Sounds like a sorry. I just want to say it sounds like one of the hurdles here is surrendering of the mind, the intellectual mind. When you were talking there, I was like, that seems like the hurdle to get past. Like, what do you mean I got to move from everything up here to my heart space because everything I've built this construct around me that protects me. You know, if you're asking to like let go of the thing that I'm using to protect, I see that as the like. So maybe you want to ask a question too, but I was gonna say like, what can you use to help someone get past that? You know, what are some tools that maybe you could suggest to break that fear?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, that's part of the devastation that it talks about, in the Gospel of Thomas, the letting go, the surrender, the detachment. But that's part of the journey. And for me, the best method that has actually helped me to move from my headspace to my heart space has been meditation. Now, that's a method. There's many methods that people have tried, and certain methods work better for, you know, each person on the journey. This is a very individual solo sport to a degree that we're dealing with when we get into spirituality. So that's why I always say it like that. Meditation has worked the best for me. But I think when I first started meditating, I had all these different misconceptions about it. And the two main misconceptions I had were, number one, the belief that meditation is about controlling your thoughts. And then number two, the belief that meditation is about trying not to think about anything. So when I first started meditating, I'm sitting there and I'm
That's
trying to
like a good
control
way
my
to
thoughts.
suffer.
Yeah. So if you believe that and you start meditating like that, good luck. It's not going to bring you that far.
There's
You're going to
dudes like
quit.
that too that are like, I meditated for so long, like white knuckling it.
I know. And yeah. So most people that approach it like that, they end up quitting because it's frustrating. It's discouraging because nothing's happening. You're not moving past the mind. The more you try to control your mind, the harder it becomes to control the mind, right? That's how the mind works. It's a trickster. So, yeah, I had to move past those misconceptions before I could actually start to meditate properly, we could say. And when I started to just become aware of my thoughts instead of trying to control my thoughts, the being aware, the awareness itself, and having a primary object in meditation where I could focus on one thing, a mantra, following my breath, staring at a candle flame, a sound, whatever, that I would focus on one thing. And anytime my mind would drift, I would simply bring my awareness back to the primary object. And yes, even with the primary object, the mind will drift and you'll be distracted and you'll think about what you're going to have for dinner that night and what happened a week ago. All these different thoughts are going to keep grabbing at you. But every time they grab at you, every time they pull you away from your primary object, you just return to it. And every time you return to it, whether you realize it or not, the mind is becoming stiller and stiller, and the thoughts become less and less. And you allow the primary object and the awareness that simply is to pull you into the deeper states of meditation where the heart space is, where your heart can open up. You see? So it's actually, like you were saying earlier, it's letting go. The more you let go, the more you surrender to the natural rhythm and flow of awareness, of beingness, instead of doing, trying to control my mind, trying to not think, trying to ascend and attain some kind of spiritual status in this meditation session. The more you let go of all the different expectations and attachments, the more you're pulled into it. And that's where the magic happens.
I think people touch in on it and don't even realize. I think there's probably people that touch in on just conscious awareness and discount it because it's too simple. Like they probably come across it every now and then without even realizing. But there's just that, what is it about that one day where you're like, wait a sec. No way. No, are you telling me it's this? And then something big happens, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of hungry ghosts. Like, you ever heard of that? Like I think it's like a Hindu idea. There's like a hell realm full of hungry ghosts that no matter how much they eat, they're never satisfied. And I kind of think of the ego that way as like, it's like a cluster of thoughts. Like you can't feed ideas. You can't feed thought. Like the odd thing is paradoxically, you kind of can, but essentially when you wonder, why am I nothing ever satisfying? Why is it never, why am I pursuing this spiritual stuff? And then the most basic thing that you forgot from childhood, you're like, wait, there's no way. There's no way it's just simply being is even too much. Let's just say isness. And then it ends up, something breaks forth. I suppose I'm pretty early in on some of this stuff, but that was profound to me. I remember some of the first times being like, wait a sec. Let me just give myself permission to assume this just baseline awareness is something profound. And then it like opens space for all kinds of peace and stillness and a weird kind of silence that's like not even talk aboutable. It's pretty cool, you know. But I want to know more about like the non-dual experience and really going further and, like you said, into the heart experience of it.
Yeah, for sure. No, you know, I think that this is something that gets overcomplicated. You know what I mean? And that was something that for me, when I first got into all of this, I was aware of that. You know, I could pick up on the gurus who would get into all these different techniques, and it was more doctrine. It was more dogma, just business disguised in spirituality. Yeah. So I was drawn to the people who made it simple because it is simple. And I think that the ultimate mystical experience is the human experience. So I think being fully human and embracing the now, living in the now, something that is super simple. I think that is ultimately what leads to the most amount of transformation and transcendence, if we want to call it that. So that's something as of lately I've been trying to do in my own life, in my teachings, in my writings. I've been trying to return to presence and just ask myself, okay, how can I make this simpler? How can I make this something that is easy to understand and something that anyone can really, relate to and resonate with? And I think there is something to that. But at the same time, we have all these concepts and ideas like non-duality, and we get so attached to trying to figure it out or trying to experience it. And okay, like I'll say it like this: for me, with non-duality, this experience of oneness, the experiences that I've had, the moments of transcendence where there was this direct encounter with what is, I wasn't trying to have those experiences. I wasn't focusing on, okay, if I just slow my brain waves down and say this mantra long enough in meditation, then I'll get it. I wasn't trying to get there because I realized that you can't get there. You can only be there. So it was actually in shifting my perspective on meditation. When I shifted my perspective on meditation from a practice to a lifestyle, a way of being, that is when I started to experience these moments of transcendence in the common, mundane, ordinary elements of life. And there would be moments where it seemed like time would stand still and the sense of being a separate self would go out the window. In the simplest stuff, the most like something in nature, something as simple as a flower, would just become the most extraordinary thing that there is. And it would totally captivate me. And that in and of itself became, if we even want to call it, a mystical experience. To me, it was just,
Home.
there's no words for it. Yeah, yeah.
Maybe something
Or
like home, and I think that could happen with a coffee cup, a snail, a sunset.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
Well, these
Tao
are
that can be
some of
named.
the ways that kind of it works your way into your life. I was going to say I was going to ask you maybe holistically, how or does awakening change the way that you go about living your life?
Sure. It's a great question. Yeah, for me, spirituality became, at first it was becoming another religion or another thing that was separate from all the other aspects of my life. But what I learned when I started practicing meditation, and then I read the autobiography of a yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. I don't know if you're
Right.
familiar with that.
Yeah, I read it this year actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kriya Yoga, right? And one of
Mm.
the main things with Kriya Yoga is, hey, it's not just about being spiritual. It's not just about meditation. You need to make sure that there's balance in all these other areas of your life. Yoga means union, oneness, harmony. So make sure that there's alignment, and yeah, like all these other aspects of your life are flowing together. And so probably about a year ago, I really started to pay attention to that. And I started to expand my spiritual practice beyond the meditation cushion, beyond my office, beyond books and teaching and writing. And I took it into nature. I took it into my relationships. I took it into my health. Um, and again, we're talking about non duality. We're talking about how everything is one. Well, if that's the case, then that would include every aspect of life. But when meditation is a lifestyle, a way of being, it just, everything becomes a meditation. And so if you're going about your day and someone says something that, really gets at you, it triggers you, you can sit back as the witness, as awareness, and you can notice the ego and how it wants to react. And instead of just unconsciously acting according to the ego, you pause and you realize, wait, I can actually choose in this moment to, instead of reacting from the ego, I can respond with clarity, with peace, with love. And that can determine a completely different outcome of the situation. And these are big time things we're talking about, big decisions. So yeah,
It's
that's what
like
I'm.
discovering if you're somebody like I've been most of my life, super prone to impulsivity, still am. It is amazing when you first are like, oh, I can just be humble, and then see how that works out. Or, you start getting a sense of your place as part of the whole, and you're like, what do I even have to be pretentious about, or what do I even have to be so selfish about? Like, but
Yeah,
the ego is different than that. It's heavy. I would assume that with some good deep awakening experiences, you're like, it would start to seem absurd to put the ego back on, to like act from some. I think it changes your relationship to suffering and pain. You'd be like, well, it's not the end of the world for me to endure a little bit of pain, bettering my character, which is essentially part of everybody else anyway, a contributing factor to this world I'm living in. It's not the end of the world to change that, because I'm not as blindly selfish as I was. At least in the beginning, that's how it feels.
sure.
Seems.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it changes how you view other people and how you treat other people. Because if we're all one, then what you're doing to the other, you're doing to yourself when there really is no other. There's just us.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it should change how you live.
Honesty plays a factor. I noticed in one of your videos you talked about that, and I think that the sense I get is that honesty can play a vital part in your pursuit of the truth, and then becomes like just obvious afterwards. Like, well, why the hell would I not be honest afterwards? You know what I mean? What am I trying to get here? But
Yeah.
leading up to it, I actually think when you're curious, honesty could be a huge thing. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
then that can help. I think.
I think honesty is the number one element in spiritual evolution. If you're not honest, you're going to have a really hard time genuinely evolving. So it's a package. I always say it's intuition, knowing how to like listen to your intuitive heart and then trust it. But then there's honesty. And sometimes in order to actually like access that intuition and to trust it, you have to be honest with yourself.
Mm.
And that's deep inner work. Yeah.
I think even honesty, because one thing I say every now and this show is like, we're not even ready for truth yet, society, but let's start with honesty, and then maybe we'll be fertile ground for truth to take hold, because I think it's become such a way of life in the West here for people to not fess up, not be honest about who they are. It's kind of, we're conditioned that way.
Well, I wanted to kind of interject here with kind of the intricate systems of our daily living, because enmeshed in politics and business and stuff like that, I'm curious as to kind of your thoughts on spiritual awakening and how like people are naturally brought into these systems that are not all honest systems, but they contribute to it. They pay taxes towards things that aren't honest. There is like this collective thing that we are all a part of, whether we, want to detach from it somehow in some place, we are still all connected to it. So what, like, I know this is a brutal question, but like, what do you think we can do as humanity to start helping move the wheel in the right direction? Because right now it feels like with the intensity of what's going on right now, especially in America and surrounding all over the world, essentially,
Sure.
There's I don't know, any thoughts or opinions on how we can deal with that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is we have to understand that we can't control the waves, but we can learn how to surf. And that's big. So life is going to be what it is. And there has to be this honesty and this acknowledgement that there are some things that we just can't control. But how we respond to those things matter. And I think a good response, regardless of the situation, regardless of what we're going through, is to be the change you want to see in the world. I just had a conversation with someone today who was wanting to bring up certain things, and we were talking about different things with politics. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we can sit around here and talk about this all day long. And yes, to a degree, there's a time and place to talk about it. But so much of what we're talking about, we can't control. So what do we do with that? Well, it is what it is. You do what you do, and you're honest about it, and you follow your intuitive heart, and you can relax and rest in that. You know what I mean? So, but I think, yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say, people might be surprised to know that there's like pretty famous enlightened people that are like, yeah, I eat meat sometimes. Like one aspect of this is maybe in a transcendent enough state or whatever, I feel like it's possible that you might realize that there's actually nothing necessarily wrong, but nevertheless, like you gotta work with what is. You know what I mean? Like morality changes over time. Like all kinds of things change over time.
Evolution, of course.
And I get one of the things that you can do is you can be hopeful when you find somebody else out there that's actually thinking similar things to you. Like I get it really encouraged when I watch some of your videos. I'm like, that's so fun. It takes your pride out of it. It's like, no, other people are coming to the same conclusions I'm coming to. There's hope there. If I can think this, if this is where I've gotten to, there's other people getting to there. Yeah. Maybe we won't blow ourselves up off the planet. I don't know. But if you're unified with God, does it even matter? You know what I mean? You'd be like, it does, of course, matter.
Right.
But maybe we're going too far in mystical directions when we start considering that maybe it doesn't even matter. I think on a personal level, though, like I happen to believe that honesty is a good policy, and that it might resolves a lot of the problems that we have in modern day with people being like, what is going on here? Is the world coming to an end? Why are people fighting? Why is there so much suffering? I think that on a personal level, if you start being honest, you even if the result is just that you get squeezed out like a sliver out of these chaotic, dramatic ego situations, you'd be like, oh, I'm over here doing my thing, being taken care of. Go figure,
Any predictions? Sure. Do you have any predictions about like where, like, if to pull you out of the present moment?
Sure. Well, we can talk about this and focus on it in the present moment.
Yeah.
So, I think that I think there is something to the zodiac. Looking back on history, I think we can see connections to different predictions with all of that. And as we enter this age of Aquarius, I think that it looks a lot different than the age of Pisces that we're coming out of. And I think it has more to do with, spiritually speaking, individuals going within and discovering their own divinity and speaking their truth and being authentic and being honest and being humble. I think all of those qualities that we're starting to see arise collectively right now is promising. It's hopeful. And I do think that it's a slow shift. It's a slow collective shift. But every time someone has an awakening and they start to embody that and express that into the world, I do think the light is becoming brighter and brighter every time that happens. So I'm not a prophet by any means, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know exactly what's coming. And that's kind of the mysterious, fun part about this journey is it's like no one really knows what's going to happen. Like, why are we even here? What's the point in all of this? Does anyone actually have it all figured out? I haven't met that person yet.
Yeah, I know.
So it's like, it's learning how to sit with mystery and embrace it. And it becomes a dance like Alan Watts used to talk about.
Yeah.
When I hear that, it resonates.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's so many surprises. Like you've even just with people that I've respected, like teachers, and I get really into what they're talking about, and then you do a little research, and it's like, what? They're like suffering from some horrible physical ailment. That's why they don't see them anymore, or they behaved really bad. Like there's so many cognitive dissonance opportunities in life in this path. Which is surprising. It can be, if you take it the wrong way, it can be a source of torment. But there's another way of looking at it where it's, that's it. This is it.
Yeah, and so much of it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it's paradoxical and
it's unpredictable.
If you could talk to someone who was kind of coming from a place that you were in before, like maybe they were in the midst of that transition. I kind of remember where I was at that time in my life. What would you, maybe some words of guidance, what would you say towards that person who's like, they're scared, they're in the middle of it, they don't feel like they got anyone to talk to, there's family involved. What do you do in a moment like that?
I would say you are not alone, first and foremost. You are not alone. And the journey is going to be a wild journey. It's not going to be all uphill. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbow. But if you learn how to listen and trust your intuitive heart, your heart will guide you. It will guide you through the valleys. It will guide you through the wilderness. It will guide you through the storms. And everything you experience, everything you go through is grist for the mill. It's all part of the evolutionary journey. You can learn from everything you go through and experience, but it's all about perspective. And the more you trust your intuitive heart, the more you discover who you really are, the more you realize that you are the light of the world, you start to see that there is something to this, ancient hermetic principle of as above, so below, as within, so without. And what I embody, my presence, is actually shaping my perceived outer world. So I know I just said a lot in a matter of a few minutes, but yeah, I would start with that. I would start with you're not alone. And, oh yeah, this is what I'd say too. I'd say, hey, you know what? Okay, let's say it like this. If I was talking to me, 7 years ago or something, still in evangelicalism, having questions at the beginning of the journey. What I would say is, hey, you know what? You have questions and you're curious and you see things maybe from a different perspective than from what you used to. Great. Spend some time alone, learn how to meditate, get away from all the noise, all the distractions, all the different voices and the information, the social media. We live in a world where we have this overload of information, right? So set aside all of that and just learn how to sit and be. And yeah, it's going to be challenging at first and it's going to be distracting and maybe chaotic in your mind, but just take a break and
Yeah.
see what happens and learn how to trust your heart.
Yeah. The good thing is that, we have the internet now. This is way different than it was, say, 20 years ago. It would have been a
Yeah.
lot harder to find people like yourself and other spiritual teachers out there with the insights and stuff that you're sharing. But, it's great that we have people like you. You've talked a little bit about God, and I always take for granted that there's people out there who do come from, say, a more traditional belief, that they have this idea of what God is like. But then, like, I remember it wasn't until I was like 36. I know it's been a while now, probably been like 8 years since I even heard the term non-duality for the first time and heard some of these, Eastern mystical ideas about God. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about that for that type of person out there who's used to more traditional view of God, and then what you now understand as God.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a big shift because obviously for someone that's in religion or a fundamentalist religion, God is everything, right? And by God, we're talking about a deity, a mega being who is in the heavens or something like that, creator of all, who's watching you, judging you, like this cosmic Santa Claus, right? That's what we're dealing with. And to go from the big shift is to go from God being a being to God being itself. I know that's wordy, but a being to beingness. And part of the inner journey, part of meditation, part of self inquiry is discovering that my being is one with all beings. And, the total number of beings on the planet is actually one. And again, that's something that comes with time and experience, not so much doctrines and dogmas. But again, you start to awareness, I amness, all of that, non-duality. So that's the shift. And I would say for a person who's open to that, again, take some time with it. Learn how to meditate, experience it for yourself. But know that this experience that you can have for yourself of non-duality, of God being itself, the ground of being, as Paul Tillich says, know that this is not just something that you can experience or something that, you will be the only person that experiences this. No, this is something that men and women have been experiencing for thousands and thousands of years, longer than we even know. And we have data to go back and we can read these ancient texts and we can see that they've been writing about this 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, right? Yeah. So, okay, so you've got the potential of, I can have this experience. I know other people right now who have had this experience and they see the divine this way. And I have all these ancient writings that have been talking about it. And then you get into quantum physics if you want to get into that. And I know God is not, that word isn't in, the quantum world, but you know what I mean? So what I think, I honestly don't know. And I'm being honest with you guys. I'm still trying to figure out when I'm talking about God, when I'm using that word in my videos or my writings, every time I bring the word God up, I try to get back into the explanation of what I mean when I say God, because if I just say God loosely without that disclaimer,
Mm.
it, I know that my audience is going to hear many different things and interpret it in different ways. So I have to go back and explain it again and again and again what I mean when I say God. And ultimately, what I always go back to is the mystics of the various traditions. In Zen Buddhism, they say the finger pointing to the moon, right? But the finger is not the moon. So all of our different names, like God, labels, concepts, ideas that we're using to try to describe that which is the ultimate, they all fall short. They're just the finger pointing to the moon. In Taoism, it's the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, right? So what we're experiencing is something that is infinite, something that is eternal, and something that is ineffable, beyond words. So we can talk about it all day long, but the ultimate encouragement is, hey, you know what? You just have to experience this for yourself.
What is the one thing I say recently? I said, one more idea won't do it. One more idea about this won't save you.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is confusing, right? Like when you were talking about the idea of ideas of God, Rupert Spira, I watched on a video recently, goes, typically people don't go around saying I'm God. We don't do that in our society,
Yeah.
right? It's like heresy to say I'm God. But he goes, it should actually be heresy to not admit that you're
Yes. I heard him say that.
God.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so like, because as you were listing things too, I wanted to, my like impulsive self wanted to be like, it's also just what is. It's also just what's like at hand, right? But I think it's just part of it. Sometimes it seems like there's a volume knob on the ego or something, and sometimes the volume knob is turned all the way up and snapped off on the ego, and that's when you see somebody that's really impulsive and doesn't maybe even understand the suffering they're causing themselves and others. And then if you can turn that down, that's a start. If you can actually get some experiences where you're like, oh, that's what it's like to get some distance, space between the potency of the ego, and then all the way off if you need to.
Yeah. And, I think some of the non-dual teachers do a good job of explaining it well. And then other teachers, like I think Alan Watts used to talk about how, like what we're looking for is what is looking. How can an eyeball see itself? Rumi said, you are what you seek. So that's the cosmic joke. It's like what we're trying to attain or experience or whatever is what we are. How does that work? Well, maybe we surrender, we let go of the trying, of the next thing, of the whatever, and just live our lives.
But oddly, it has to be realized you can't actually let go of anything, it seems.
It's another layer of it. Yeah, right.
Some of the more powerful times I've had, which I would describe them, let's say, as beautiful, have been in guided meditations. I've been guided into a state where a letting go occurs.
Sure.
And then it's like, what was recently I was listening to one, and it was like, instead of like feeling this tension in your body or whatever, realize that it's the silence, like the background of this, is allowing for these experiences to be. Everything's allowed, essentially, all these sensations. And then a peculiar thing happens when you're like, when an allowing of everything that's transpiring, your neurosis and all this stuff, it takes on a different nature, and the relationship to it changes. I don't know. I probably have some years of learning how to communicate ahead of me. But,
well, Logan, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out to come share some of your story, your insights with us about this. This was really great. I thought maybe you could kind of close things out. Maybe if you have one overarching message that you'd like to kind of share with our audience, and at the same time, you can also let them know where they can find you, what you got going on, and all that good stuff. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me on. I really have enjoyed this conversation. It's been a great flow and great questions. So great job on y'all's end of directing it. But
thank you.
Yeah. And I guess for a closing message, I think I talk a lot in my videos about how this human experience is like a curriculum. And I don't actually mean that literally. But I kind of use it in a way to say, you know what, you can like there is some, I do believe there is some evolution of the soul happening. I don't know exactly how it looks like, but that just deep within me that resonates. And so the question is, okay, well, if this is an earth school or if we're experiencing this human experience for some kind of curriculum of the soul, then what is the curriculum? What is there to be ultimately learned? And in my experience, and what I'm learning is that this has been the experience for many other people, it is to learn how to transcend judgment, which is duality, separation consciousness, and embrace unconditional love. Learn how to receive unconditional love and then how to express that into the world. Simple message, but it can take a lifetime learning how to actually live it and for it to become a reality for you. So I think that ultimately that is why we're here. I think that's what we come here to learn. So there's that. And I think the unconditional love, learning how to receive it, learning how to express it and be it, has become something that I've prioritized over my old pursuit of like needing to have one objective truth of reality, a philosophical truth or a theological truth. I've given up that pursuit and I'm like, okay, this unconditional love, non-judgment, this resonates with my soul. I'm rolling with this. And then for as far as being able to find me and my work, pretty much everything's on my website, loganbarone.com. I have a YouTube channel, and on my website there's all my social media links like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all of that. So pretty much
awesome.
It.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great conversation, Logan. Anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks again. All right.